Most people think gratitude is soft, polite, something you say before a meal or write in a journal when life is going well. That's why most people never feel it when they actually need it. Real gratitude isn't born from comfort. It's born from contrast. You don't become grateful by listing what's good. You become grateful by facing what could be taken from you and realizing it hasn't been. Yet, imagine waking up one day and everything hurts. Your body doesn't work the way it used to. Your energy is gone. Your memory is foggy. The clock is louder than your heartbeat because you know you're running out of time. Now imagine opening your eyes and realizing you're not there. You're here, in this body, with this strength, with this clarity. Nothing amazing even happened yet, and still this moment is a gift. That feeling right there, that's gratitude. Gratitude isn't pretending things are perfect. It's understanding they could be worse and feeling that truth deeply. You don't appreciate your health until you imagine losing it. You don't appreciate the people in your life until you imagine a world where they're gone. When you strip away the illusion of permanence, what's left becomes priceless. You're still here. You're breathing. You've survived everything that's tried to break you. That alone is proof. Gratitude isn't about optimism. It's about reality. And reality says this: the fact that you're alive today means you've already endured more than you think, and that makes this moment worth respecting. Most people struggle with gratitude because they try to manufacture it from comfort. They wait for something good to happen and then attempt to feel thankful after the fact. That approach fails because the human brain adapts quickly to positive conditions. What you have today becomes normal tomorrow. Comfort dulls appreciation. The only reliable way to generate real gratitude is through contrast, and contrast is created by imagining loss before it happens. This is what it means to operationalize gratitude rather than treating it like a vague emotion. When you deliberately imagine a terrible future, your brain treats it as real. Your nervous system does not fully distinguish between vividly imagined pain and actual pain. Heart rate changes, emotion shifts, perspective tightens. In that moment, you feel what it would be like to lose the thing you currently take for granted. Then, when you pull yourself back into the present and recognize that this loss has not occurred, relief floods in. That relief is gratitude, not the polite kind, but the kind that actually changes how you behave. This is why gratitude exercises that only focus on listing positives feel shallow. Saying "I'm grateful for my health" means nothing if you have never sat with the image of waking up sick, weak, dependent, or dying. Without imagining the downside, the upside has no weight. Gratitude is not created by adding good thoughts. It is created by subtracting imagined suffering. The absence of pain becomes visible only when pain is first placed into the frame. Imagining a terrible future also breaks entitlement. Entitlement comes from assuming continuity, that tomorrow will look like today, that what you have will remain accessible, that people will stay, that your body will function. When you challenge that assumption, even briefly, you collapse the illusion of permanence. The moment you would challenge that assumption, even briefly, you collapse the illusion of permanence. The moment you accept that everything you value is temporary, everything you value becomes more meaningful. This is not pessimism. It is realism used intentionally. Operational gratitude is powerful because it does not depend on external change. Nothing in your life has to improve for gratitude to increase. You do not need more money, better relationships, or fewer problems. You only need to acknowledge that worse outcomes were possible and still are. When you imagine those outcomes clearly and emotionally, the present moment gains value by comparison. The baseline shifts from expectation to appreciation. This practice also builds resilience. When you rehearse worst-case scenarios in controlled conditions, you reduce fear. You prove to yourself that even the thought of loss can be endured. At the same time, you strengthen attachment to the present without clinging to it. You enjoy what you have more fully because you are no longer pretending it is guaranteed. Gratitude becomes grounded, not fragile. People often avoid this method because they think imagining terrible things will make them anxious or negative. The opposite happens when done correctly. Anxiety comes from vague fear. Gratitude comes from specific contrast. You are not spiraling into catastrophe. You are briefly visiting it, then intentionally returning. The return is what creates the emotional payoff. The relief is earned, not forced. When gratitude is operationalized this way, it stops being a mood and becomes a tool. You can access it on demand, even during hard days, even when nothing is going your way. You stop asking life to give you reasons to be grateful and start using perspective to uncover the value that was already there. The second key point builds on contrast by using time as the amplifier. Instead of imagining a vague negative outcome, You project yourself far into the future, to a version of yourself at the end of life. Old, tired, slower, and pain, and aware that the number of remaining days is limited. This future version of you has already paid every price. The body is worn down. Energy is scarce. Regret is louder than ambition. Time is no longer abundant, it is rationed. When you fully step into that perspective, you feel the weight of decline and finality, not intellectually, but emotionally. From that position, you imagine waking up in your current body. You sit up and nothing hurts. Your joints work, your breath is steady, your mind is clear, you remember who you are and what you want to do. You can stand without assistance, you can move without pain, you can decide. This reversal creates an immediate emotional shock because your brain recalibrates what normal means. What once felt average now feels extraordinary. Nothing external changed, only the frame did. This future to present contrast works because humans undervalue what feels permanent and overvalue what feels scarce. In old age, everything becomes scarce time. Strength, independence, options. By temporarily living in that future mentally, you inherit its scarcity mindset. When you return to the present, you carry that scarcity with you, and it turns ordinary moments into opportunities for appreciation. You are not grateful because life is easy. You are grateful because life is still open. The power of this frame is that it bypasses logic and goes straight to emotion. Telling yourself that youth, health, and clarity are valuable does nothing if you have never felt what it is like to lose them. The imagined future gives you access to that feeling without having to actually suffer the loss. It is borrowed wisdom from your older self, delivered early enough to change how you live now. This exercise also corrects perspective during hardship. When something feels heavy today, the future version of you would trade almost anything to have this problem, instead of the limitations they face. What feels unbearable now becomes desirable in comparison. That does not minimize current pain, it contextualizes it. Difficulty does not disappear, but it becomes meaningful rather than overwhelming. There's also a moral clarity that comes from this frame. When you imagine being near the end, trivial concerns lose importance. Status, ego, and minor frustrations fade. What remains is health, time, people, and the ability to choose how to spend the day. When you wake up in the present with that clarity intact, you behave differently. You waste less time, you complain less, you act with urgency without panic. This perspective strengthens gratitude because it ties appreciation to inevitability. Aging, decline, and death are not hypothetical. They are guaranteed. By acknowledging that certainty now, you remove shock later and increase presence today. Gratitude stops being reactive and becomes anticipatory. You appreciate things not because they are perfect, but because you know exactly where they are headed. The future self-frame is not about fear. It is about respect for time. It teaches you that the version of you who has nothing left would give anything to have what you are ignoring right now. When that realization lands emotionally, gratitude stops being something you practice and becomes something you feel automatically. Gratitude becomes real when it is felt in the body rather than processed only in the mind. Most people try to think their way into appreciation by repeating phrases or reminding themselves that they should feel thankful. But the body does not respond to obligation. It responds to contrast. When you vividly imagine physical limitation, pain, or decline, your nervous system reacts immediately. Shoulders tighten, breathing changes. There is a sense of restriction. Even though nothing has actually happened, the body experiences a preview of loss. When you then return your attention to the present and notice that your body is not in pain, that movement is possible. That standing up does not require effort or assistance. The contrast produces relief. That relief is gratitude in its most honest form. It is not a moral virtue or a positive attitude. It is the recognition of freedom at a physical level. You feel it before you label it. This is why health is one of the most powerful yet invisible sources of gratitude. When the body works, it stays silent. You do not notice your knees when they bend easily or your back when it supports you without complaint. Function disappears into the background. Pain, on the other hand, dominates attention. By intentionally imagining pain or limitation, you bring awareness back to what is currently working. The absence of pain becomes something you can sense rather than ignore. Mental clarity follows the same pattern. When you imagine losing focus, memory, or cognitive sharpness, you touch a fear that is deeply unsettling. The idea of being mentally foggy, confused, or dependent strips away autonomy. When you then realize that your mind is clear, oriented, and capable of decision-making, that clarity feels like a resource rather than a given. You stop treating focus as normal and start treating it as valuable. This bodily grounding of gratitude also neutralizes self-pity. Emotional distress often feels absolute because it fills the entire frame of attention. When you anchor yourself in physical capability, you create perspective. You may be tired, stressed, or disappointed, but you are not helpless. You can move your body, you can take action, you can respond. That awareness does not erase emotional difficulty, but it prevents it from defining your entire experience. Another advantage of this approach is durability. Gratitude rooted in sensation does not depend on circumstances and prove it. Even on difficult days, the fact that you can breathe deeply, walk unaided, think clearly, and choose your next action provides a stable baseline. It becomes harder to feel completely defeated when your body is still functioning. There is a quiet resilience that comes from knowing you are capable at a fundamental level. This perspective also transforms how you view effort and discomfort. Physical exertion stops feeling like suffering and starts feeling like evidence of ability. When you remember that one-day movement may be painful or impossible, the chance to work, train, struggle, and exert yourself feels earned. Discomfort becomes a signal of capacity rather than a sign of injustice. You are not being punished by effort. You are using something that will not always be available. When gratitude is anchored in the body, it no longer requires constant reminders or affirmations. You do not need to convince yourself that life is good. You simply notice that your body and mind are still operational. That noticing creates a steady, grounded form of appreciation that influences how you use your time, how seriously you take opportunities, and how much respect you give to the present moment without needing to be told that you should feel thankful. Gratitude deepens when it stops being dependent on addition and starts being driven by subtraction. Most people believe appreciation comes from gaining something new, a win, an upgrade, better circumstances, or a positive outcome. That belief trains the mind to wait. It delays gratitude until life delivers more. The problem is that the mind adapts quickly to improvements, and what once felt like a gift soon becomes an expectation. When gratitude relies on addition, it is temporary and fragile. Subtractive gratitude works in the opposite direction. Instead of asking what good has happened, it asks what bad has not happened. This shift changes the emotional math entirely. When you imagine losing something you currently have and then recognize that the loss has not occurred, the value of that thing increases instantly. You do not need new outcomes to feel grateful. You need awareness of avoided pain. The human brain is wired to notice threats more than comforts. This is why negative events feel heavier than positive ones. Subtractive gratitude uses that wiring intentionally. By placing a potential negative into awareness, you activate the brain's threat detection. When you then realize the threat is absent, relief follows. Relief is more emotionally powerful than mild happiness, which is why this method creates stronger and more lasting gratitude. This approach also eliminates entitlement. Entitlement comes from assuming continuity, believing that what exists now will exist tomorrow. When you subtract imagined outcomes, illness, loss, failure, separation, you break that assumption. You see clearly that nothing you value is guaranteed. Health can disappear, relationships can end, stability can collapse. When that truth is felt, not just acknowledged, what remains in your life gains weight and significance. Subtractive gratitude does not require optimism or positive thinking. It works even in difficult seasons. You may be struggling financially, emotionally, or professionally, but there are still countless ways reality could be worse. The goal is not to dismiss your pain. The goal is to prevent your pain from blinding you to what has been preserved. Gratitude becomes compatible with struggle rather than something that only exists in its absence. This mindset also strengthens resilience. When you repeatedly practice imagining loss and returning to the present, you train your nervous system to tolerate uncertainty. You stop being shocked by the idea that things can go wrong. At the same time, you become more present with what is right. This combination creates stability. You are less reactive when adversity appears and more appreciative before it does. Another important effect of subtractive gratitude is behavioral change. When you feel the value of something through the lens of potential loss, you treat it differently. You protect it. You invest in it. You stop wasting it. Time becomes more precious when you imagine running out of it. Relationships become more important when you imagine life without them. Health becomes a priority when you imagine its absence. People often avoid this practice because they think imagining negative outcomes will make them fearful or pessimistic. In reality, fear comes from avoidance and vagueness. Subtractive gratitude is specific and controlled. You visit the worst case briefly, intentionally, and then return. The return is where the gratitude is generated. Without the return, there is no payoff. With it, the emotional contrast becomes grounding rather than overwhelming. When gratitude is built through subtraction, it stops being something you wait for and becomes something you can generate on demand. You are no longer dependent on life improving to feel appreciation. You are dependent only on perspective. That shift puts control back in your hands and turns gratitude into a practical tool rather than a passive emotion that appears only when conditions are favorable. From that position, you imagine waking up in your current body. You sit up and nothing hurts. Your joints work, your breath is steady, your mind is clear. You remember who you are and what you want to do. You can stand without assistance. You can move without pain. You can decide. This reversal creates an immediate emotional shock because your brain recalibrates what normal means. What once felt average now feels extraordinary. Nothing external changed. Only the frame did. This future to present contrast works because humans undervalue what feels permanent and overvalue what feels scarce. In old age, everything becomes scarce time, strength, independence, options. By temporarily living in that future mentally, you inherit its scarcity mindset. When you return to the present, you carry that scarcity mindset. When you return to the present, you carry that scarcity with you, and it turns ordinary moments into opportunities for appreciation. You are not grateful because life is easy. You are grateful because life is still open. The power of this frame is that it bypasses logic and goes straight to emotion. Telling yourself that youth, health, and clarity are valuable does nothing if you have never felt what it is like to lose them. The imagined future gives you access to that feeling without having to actually suffer the loss. It is borrowed wisdom from your older self, delivered early enough to change how you live now. This exercise also corrects perspective during hardship. When something feels heavy today, the future version of you would trade almost anything to have this problem instead of the limitations they face. What feels unbearable now becomes desirable in comparison. That does not minimize current pain. It contextualizes it. Difficulty does not disappear, but it becomes meaningful rather than overwhelming. There is also a moral clarity that comes from this frame. When you imagine being near the end, trivial concerns lose importance. Status, ego, and minor frustrations fade. What remains is health, time, people, and the ability to choose how to spend a day. When you wake up in the present with that clarity intact, you behave differently. You waste less time, you complain less, you act with urgency without panic. This perspective strengthens gratitude because it ties appreciation to inevitability. Aging, decline, and death are not hypothetical. They are guaranteed. By acknowledging that certainty now, you remove shock later and increase presence today. Gratitude stops being reactive and becomes anticipatory. You appreciate things not because they are perfect, but because you know exactly where they are headed. The future self frame is not about fear. It is about respect for time. It teaches you that the version of you who has nothing left would give anything to have what you are ignoring right now. When that realization lands emotionally, gratitude stops being something you practice and becomes something you feel automatically. Most people misunderstand gratitude because they approach it abstractly. They keep it vague, intellectual, and safe. They say words like, be thankful, or focus on the positives, without ever emotionally engaging with what those positives are protecting them from. Abstract positivity feels clean, but it is weak. It does not change behavior, perspective, or emotional state because it never creates urgency. Real gratitude requires specificity, and specificity comes from vividly imagining worst-case scenarios. The mind does not respond to general ideas. It responds to pictures, sensations, and consequences. When someone says, "I'm grateful for my life," the statement barely registers unless it is attached to a clear alternative. Life compared to what? Without contrast, the phrase has no weight. When you imagine a specific worst-case outcome lying in a hospital bed, receiving a terminal diagnosis, losing someone you love, waking up unable to move, being alone with no options left, the emotional system activates. Fear, sadness, and seriousness appear immediately. That activation is what gives gratitude something to push against. Vivid imagination matters because the brain treats detailed mental simulations as real experiences. When you imagine a worst-case scenario with clarity where you are, what you hear, how your body feels, what you have lost, your nervous system responds as if the event were happening. This is uncomfortable, which is why most people avoid it. But that discomfort is the entry price. Without it, gratitude stays shallow and performative. Abstract positivity skips this step. It jumps straight to appreciation without ever earning it. That is why it feels forced and temporary. Saying things could be worse without actually seeing how they could be worse does nothing. The emotional system remains unchanged. Vivid worst-case thinking, on the other hand, creates a temporary emotional low. When you then return to the present and recognize that the imagined disaster has not occurred, the relief is genuine. That relief becomes gratitude that you do not have to talk yourself into. This approach also sharpens awareness. When you imagine losing something in detail, you suddenly see its value everywhere. Health stops being a background condition and becomes a daily advantage. Time stops being something you kill and becomes something you spend deliberately. Relationships stop being casual and become fragile. Worst-case imagination strips away complacency and replaces it with respect. There's also honesty in this method. Life is not guaranteed to improve. Bodies decline, people leave, circumstances change. Abstract positivity often relies on denial of these realities. Vivid worst-case thinking accepts them up front. That acceptance creates emotional maturity. Gratitude becomes grounded in truth rather than optimism. You are grateful not because you believe everything will be fine, but because you understand how easily it could not be. Many people fear that imagining worst-case scenarios will make them anxious or pessimistic. The opposite is usually true when done intentionally. Anxiety comes from vague, unexamined fear. Worst-case imagination is precise and controlled. You choose the scenario, you enter it briefly, you feel it fully, then you exit deliberately. The clarity reduces background anxiety because there's nothing left lurking in the shadows. The fear has been named and faced. When gratitude is built this way, it changes how you show up. You complain less, not because you are suppressing frustration, but because you understand what real problems look like. You waste less time because you have imagined running out of it. You treat ordinary days with seriousness because you have seen how easily they could disappear. Gratitude stops being a personality trait and becomes a daily operating system driven by clear-eyed awareness of what you still have and what you very realistically could lose. Gratitude for health is difficult because good health is quiet. When your body works, it does not demand attention. You wake up, move through the day, breathe, think, and function without friction. Because nothing is wrong, nothing stands out. Over time, health becomes invisible, and invisibility breeds neglect. The only reliable way to feel genuine appreciation for health is to imagine what life looks like when it is taken away. When you vividly imagine serious illness, the frame shifts immediately. Picture waking up knowing your body is fighting something you cannot see or control. Medical appointments replace plans. Energy becomes limited, pain becomes a daily variable. The future feels shorter, not because time has changed, but because certainty has disappeared. Even simple actions carry weight. Standing up, eating, sleeping, spirit, thinking clearly are no longer assumed. They are negotiated. The emotional load of that reality is heavy, and the mind responds to it instantly. Now contrast that imagined state with the present. You are not in a hospital bed. You are not waiting on test results that could redefine your life. You are not counting days or managing decline. Your body may not be perfect, but it is functioning. That realization creates relief, and relief is the emotional gateway to gratitude. Not polite gratitude, but grounded appreciation that stabilizes perspective. This contrast works because health is binary at its extremes. You do not fully understand what it gives you until you experience or imagine its absence. Telling yourself to be thankful for health without imagining illness is like trying to appreciate oxygen without ever holding your breath. There is no emotional reference point. When illness enters the frame, health becomes tangible. Imagining illness also removes the illusion of control. Many people subconsciously believe that health is earned or guaranteed if they do the right things. While behavior matters, illness often arrives without permission. Accepting this truth does not create fear. It creates humility. You realize that being healthy today is not proof of superiority or discipline. It is partially luck. That understanding softens ego and strengthens appreciation. This practice also changes how you treat your body. When you imagine illness clearly, self-care stops feeling optional. Sleep, movement, nutrition, and recovery are no longer framed as lifestyle preferences. They become acts of preservation. You are not trying to optimize. You are trying to protect something you now recognize as fragile. Gratitude shifts from words to behavior. There is also emotional clarity that comes from this perspective. Many daily frustrations lose their intensity when placed next to the possibility of serious illness. Deadlines, inconveniences, and minor conflicts feel smaller when you imagine navigating them with pain, fatigue, or uncertainty layered on top. This does not invalidate stress, but it right-sizes it. You stop confusing discomfort with catastrophe. People often avoid imagining illness because they think it will make them anxious. In reality, anxiety comes from avoidance. When illness is an unnamed fear in the background, it creates tension. When it is named, visualized, and then consciously dismissed as not currently real, the nervous system settles. You are no longer pretending it cannot happen. You are acknowledging that it has not happened yet. Health-based gratitude also reinforces presence. When you realize that your current physical state is temporary, you stop postponing life. You use your energy while you have it. You move your body with intention. You engage fully because you understand that the ability to do so is not permanent. Gratitude becomes active rather than reflective. This method does not require you to be morbid or dramatic. It requires honesty. Illness is part of the human contract. By facing that reality briefly and deliberately, you gain access to a deeper appreciation for the fact that today, your body is still on your side, still carrying you forward, still giving you the capacity to act, choose, and endure. Perspective only changes when it is felt, not when it is explained. Hearing that things could be worse rarely moves anyone because the statement stays theoretical. The mind acknowledges it, but the nervous system does not register it. For a perspective shift to have real impact, the worst alternative must feel emotionally real, even if only for a moment. That brief emotional exposure is what recalibrates how the present is experienced. When a worse reality feels real, the brain stops negotiating and starts reassessing. Priorities reorganize automatically. Complaints lose momentum. What felt heavy minutes ago suddenly feels manageable. This happens because the emotional system has been given a new reference point. Without that reference point, the present feels absolute. With it, the present becomes relative, and relativity creates relief. This is why accidental reframes are often so powerful. When someone believes something terrible has happened, even briefly, their internal world shifts instantly. Fear narrows attention, the future collapses. All secondary concerns disappear. Then, when that belief turns out to be false and reality snaps back to normal, the emotional rebound is intense. Nothing in the external world improved, yet everything feels lighter. That lightness is not optimism. It is perspective earned through contrast. The effectiveness of this mechanism comes from how the brain encodes experience. Emotional weight is assigned based on comparison, not facts. A problem feels big or small depending on what it is being compared to in that moment. When the comparison is vague, the problem dominates. When the comparison is concrete and severe, the same problem shrinks. The mind does not need to be convinced logically. It updates automatically once the emotional contrast is experienced. Brief exposure is important. Living in worst-case scenarios continuously would be damaging, but controlled, short exposure produces clarity. You enter the worst reality long enough for it to feel real. Then you exit intentionally. The exit is where the shift happens. The nervous system relaxes, perspective widens, and gratitude appears without being summoned. The present moment feels survivable, sometimes even fortunate, because it has been compared to something far heavier. This type of perspective shift also strengthens emotional resilience. When you experience how quickly your internal state can change based on framing, you stop trusting every emotional reaction as final. You realize that intensity does not equal truth. A bad day feels catastrophic until a worse possibility is introduced. Once you see that contrast, emotional rigidity softens. You become harder to destabilize because you understand how much perception influences experience. There is also a grounding effect. When a worse reality feels real, ego dissolves. Small grievances lose importance. The mind returns to basics, safety, life, presence, people. When you come back from that state, you often feel calmer and more focused. Not because your problems disappeared, but because they have been placed in proportion. Perspective restores scale. This process does not minimize suffering, it contextualizes it. Pain still exists, but it is no longer the only thing in the frame. When the mind has touched a deeper threat and then returns safely, it gains confidence in its ability to endure. That confidence reduces panic and increases patience. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start recognizing, this is something I can handle. The reason this works so reliably is because it bypasses motivation and goes straight to awareness. You do not need discipline to feel relieved when you realize something terrible is not true. Relief is automatic. Gratitude follows naturally. Perspective shifts do not need repetition when they're emotionally real. One moment of genuine contrast can undo weeks of rumination. When you allow a worse reality to feel real, even briefly, you stop demanding that life feel easy in order to feel grateful. You become capable of appreciating stability, survival, and continuation. The present no longer has to be perfect to be acceptable. It only has to be better than the alternative you just escaped, and that realization has the power to reset how you see everything that comes next. Life itself is proof of endurance, but most people fail to notice it because they are always looking for external validation or permission to keep going. Every day you survive through challenges, mistakes, emotional pain, physical discomfort, and uncertainty. You accumulate evidence of resilience. Yet, the evidence sits quietly in the background because survival is invisible. We only notice when something fails, breaks, or stops. That is why it takes conscious attention to recognize that simply continuing to live and act is a remarkable achievement. Every person has faced moments that felt overwhelming, moments where quitting would have been understandable, even rational. Yet here you are. You woke up today. You moved through yesterday. The cumulative weight of past obstacles is proof that you have the capacity to endure more. It is not hypothetical. It is concrete. You may not feel strong, but strength is measured by continuation, not by absence of struggle. Every action taken in the face of difficulty is evidence that you can handle what life throws at you. Acknowledging this fact transforms how you approach challenges. When you stop waiting for external affirmation, your perspective shifts from fear and doubt to recognition of capability. You no longer need someone to tell you that you are strong, capable, or resilient. Your history already demonstrates it. Every hardship you survived is a data point confirming your ability to adapt, recover, and persist. That understanding is stabilizing because it is based on reality, not wishful thinking or motivational cliches. Life as evidence also reframes failure. Most people view failure as proof of weakness. When you see survival itself as evidence, failure becomes a temporary state rather than a permanent label. You have endured before, so you can endure again. Setbacks are just data points in a long record of continuation. This mindset reduces panic, discouragement, and despair because it removes the need for perfection. Continuation, not flawless execution, becomes the benchmark for success. Recognizing your life as proof encourages active gratitude. It is easy to feel gratitude for accomplishments, relationships, or material gain, but those are conditional. Life itself, the fact that you are breathing, thinking, and moving forward, is unconditional evidence of endurance. Every day survived is a small victory, whether or not external results align with your expectations. This perspective fosters humility, patience, and a grounded sense of self. It reminds you that your value and capability are inherent in your existence, not just in your output. This awareness also strengthens resilience in real time. When faced with challenges, you no longer approach them with panic or despair. You remember that the same mind and body that carried you through past trials are still functioning. You draw on that silent record of persistence, using it as proof that you can navigate what lies ahead. Confidence grows because it is validated by lived experience, not borrowed advice or motivational rhetoric. Every day becomes a reminder that you have already been tested and have survived. Life as evidence changes how you measure personal growth. Progress is no longer defined solely by external milestones or accolades. The ability to continue, to keep showing up, and to persist through hardship becomes the primary metric. This shifts focus from instant gratification or comparison to endurance, consistency, and cumulative strength. Every small step forward is significant because it is proof that you are still capable of handling challenges. By internalizing the fact that survival itself is proof, you remove dependence on others for validation, reassurance, or permission. You stop waiting for life to give you reasons to keep going because the reason is already embedded in your history. Your existence, your actions, your continued navigation of hardships, all of it demonstrates your capacity. Recognizing this creates a quiet confidence that does not fluctuate with circumstances, setbacks, or external opinion. It is an unshakable baseline rooted in reality. Endurance is often underestimated because people look for evidence of strength in dramatic moments or external recognition. They assume resilience must be proven through monumental achievements, heroic acts, or visible victories. In reality, the simple act of continuing to live, to wake up each day, to confront the responsibilities, challenges, and frustrations that arrive without warning is already proof of capability. Every day survive quietly affirms that you can handle what life places in front of you, even when it feels like the weight is too much. The fact that you are still here, despite the cumulative struggles of the past, is irrefutable evidence of endurance. Life tests everyone in ways that are often invisible to outsiders. Loss, disappointment, failure, and pain accumulate over time, shaping experiences and reactions. Most people dismiss their own survival as ordinary because it is familiar, but the extraordinary lies in continuity. Every obstacle you have navigated, whether emotional, physical, or circumstantial, has already demanded more than you thought you could give. You may have felt incapable at times, yet you acted anyway. That series of actions, however small they seemed, collectively demonstrates an ability to endure far beyond what most recognize. Acknowledging this reality changes how present difficulties are approached. When a new challenge arises, it is tempting to assume it is exceptional or insurmountable. The mind tends to dramatize hardship, but looking back on the cumulative record of past endurance provides perspective. You've already faced and survived situations that once felt impossible. That track record is objective proof that despite current stress, frustration, or pain, you can continue moving forward. You do not need validation from external sources to confirm resilience because the evidence exists within your own history. This understanding reframes failure and setbacks entirely. Failure is not an indication of weakness, but rather a part of the ongoing process of survival. Each setback is simply another point along the continuum of experience, a moment that tests and strengthens endurance. The act of continuing despite the failure becomes the measure of strength. The same person who may have stumbled yesterday is capable today because survival is cumulative. Every previous instance of getting up after difficulty has built a foundation of confidence in the ability to withstand future challenges. Recognizing life as proof of endurance also reinforces a sense of internal stability. It reduces the need for constant reassurance from others or dependence on external outcomes to validate capability. The fact that you've navigated adversity without collapsing under it is self-evident. This internal validation fosters autonomy, allowing you to face new problems with clarity rather than panic. When you see the continuity of survival as evidence, stress becomes more manageable because it is placed in context. The present difficulty is simply another part of a series you have already proven capable of handling. Moreover, this perspective strengthens gratitude. Survival itself becomes a foundation for appreciation because each day you endure is a victory in its own right. Life is not merely something to be endured. It is a continuous record of proof that you can handle challenges, setbacks, and unexpected events. Recognizing this fact encourages presence and reduces unnecessary anxiety. You no longer need to wait for success, approval, or external validation to confirm your strength. Your existence already confirms it. Understanding the evidence inherent in endurance also shapes decision-making. Actions taken from a place of proven capability are more deliberate, confident, and focused. Fear loses its grip because it is tempered by the awareness of survival. You act not out of desperation, but out of knowledge that you have successfully navigated hardships before and can do so again. Each step, each choice, each day survived becomes part of a larger pattern, confirming that you are equipped to handle whatever comes next. The reality of life is that you do not need extraordinary preparation, insight, or permission to keep moving forward. Most people overcomplicate survival, as if enduring challenges require special guidance or a sudden burst of clarity. In truth, every day you continue living is proof that you are capable of handling what comes next. You are already showing up, making decisions, and responding to circumstances that would have broken you at a different time in your life. That ongoing act of continuation is evidence enough that you do not need validation or instruction to keep going. Endurance is cumulative. Every challenge, mistake, and setback you have faced has already demanded more than you thought you could manage. You may have doubted yourself in the moment, but the fact that you survived, adapted, or overcame shows that capability was present all along. You do not need to wait for someone to tell you that you are resilient or strong. Your lived experience provides that proof continuously. Every morning you wake up and engage with life adds another layer of confirmation that you can handle what is placed before you. This perspective changes how present difficulties are experienced. When a problem arises, it is common to panic, to search for external guidance, or to assume that the challenge is too great. But looking at life as a record of evidence flips that thinking. You do not need an answer from anyone else, because your own history demonstrates that you have the capacity to manage difficulties. The fact that you have persisted through everything to this point proves that you are already capable of enduring the current moment and the ones to come. Recognizing your continuity as proof also reframes how you perceive personal failure. Most people treat mistakes or setbacks as indicators of weakness, as though a single event can define their capability. In reality, the act of surviving, adapting, and continuing despite those moments is far more telling. You do not need to achieve perfection to validate your ability to endure. The simple act of moving forward, step by step, is enough. Each day survived adds another data point to the evidence that you can handle whatever life presents. This understanding fosters confidence that is grounded in reality rather than wishful thinking. External validation is unreliable, temporary, and often inconsistent. Lived experience, on the other hand, is irrefutable. Every morning you wake up, every decision you make, every small step forward, all of these are concrete demonstrations of resilience. When you internalize that, fear loses its grip, hesitation diminishes, and the need for reassurance from others becomes secondary. You recognize that the ability to endure is already built into your life, waiting to be acknowledged. This mindset also encourages action without overthinking. Many people wait for ideal conditions, perfect clarity, or permission to act, believing they cannot proceed without these things. But the reality is that continuation does not require perfection. You are already acting, already responding, already engaging with life. Each action, no matter how small or imperfect, confirms your capacity to handle reality. You do not need to stop and seek external guidance because your track record is sufficient evidence that you can adapt and respond appropriately. Furthermore, viewing life as evidence cultivates resilience in moments of uncertainty. Challenges feel less intimidating when you recognize that every hardship you have survived has prepared you for the next. You do not need external reinforcement because you can rely on your own experience. This perspective builds confidence that is stable, internal, and self-sustaining. The understanding that continuation itself is proof changes how you approach obstacles, setbacks, and the daily pressures of life. By acknowledging that you are already enduring and capable, you remove unnecessary doubt and hesitation. You stop looking outward for answers and start trusting what you already know from experience, that you have survived difficulties before and you are doing it right now. Your life itself provides all the evidence you need that you are equipped to handle whatever comes next, without waiting for affirmation, instruction, or permission from anyone outside yourself. Pain and hardship are constant companions in life, yet most people interpret them as signals of failure or weakness. The truth is that surviving difficulty is proof of strength, and enduring past challenges is more significant than any external validation could ever be. Life continuously tests individuals in ways that are both visible and invisible, and each time you navigate those tests successfully, you are adding evidence that you are capable of handling whatever comes next. This endurance is not abstract. It is measurable through continued presence, decision-making, and adaptation. Every struggle you have faced, emotional, physical, or circumstantial, has demanded energy, focus, and mental fortitude. Even when you doubted yourself, when you felt exhausted or incapable, you acted anyway. You continued, and in doing so, you demonstrated that you can survive more than you often acknowledge. Survival itself is a metric of resilience, far more reliable than accolades, external praise, or perfection. Every day lived, every problem confronted, and every difficulty endured becomes evidence that your capacity to handle challenges is greater than you assume. Recognizing this reality changes how current and future difficulties are experienced. Most people wait for guidance, motivation, or confirmation that they are capable before continuing to act. But the fact is that endurance is already proven in every moment that you have moved forward despite obstacles. You do not need external reassurance to persist. The cumulative record of survival already demonstrates your ability to handle stress, loss, failure, and uncertainty. This internal proof is immediate, tangible, and reliable. Understanding that past endurance is evidence also transforms failure. Failure is not a reflection of weakness, nor does it negate capability. The act of continuing despite failure is itself a testament to resilience. Every setback that has been navigated successfully, no matter how small or difficult, adds to the understanding that survival is not dependent on perfection or luck. Challenges are temporary. Your capacity to continue is permanent. This perspective reduces fear and self-doubt, allowing you to act with greater confidence and clarity. Internalizing this truth also creates stability. Relying on external validation is unnecessary when you recognize that your life is already proof of your capability. The nervous system responds to this awareness by reducing panic and anxiety because you have repeatedly demonstrated through lived experience that you can withstand hardship. Challenges that once seemed overwhelming now appear manageable in context. The evidence of endurance gives perspective, helping to scale difficulties appropriately without minimizing their reality. This mindset encourages decisive action. Hesitation, procrastination, and overthinking often stem from underestimating one's own capacity to endure. By viewing survival itself as proof, you understand that you already have what it takes to navigate obstacles. Every prior instance of acting in the face of difficulty is confirmation that the same capability exists now. Action becomes less contingent on perfection, planning, or reassurance, and more grounded in the certainty of your own proven resilience. Acknowledging that survival is evidence also strengthens patience and emotional regulation. When a challenge feels unbearable, remembering that you have endured previously provides perspective. The intensity of fear, frustration, or stress diminishes because it is placed within a context of repeated survival. Emotional resilience grows as you understand that difficulties are temporary, whereas your capacity to endure is persistent. Finally, endurance as evidence naturally cultivates gratitude. You do not need extraordinary circumstances to appreciate your own strength. Simply surviving, continuing to act, and navigating the challenges that life presents is proof that you are capable, adaptable, and resilient. Recognizing this allows you to approach each day with a sense of confidence, presence, and quiet assurance in your ability to handle whatever comes next without needing affirmation from outside sources. Gratitude becomes most powerful when it is tied directly to awareness of impermanence. Most people take life, health, relationships, and daily freedoms for granted because they assume continuity. They believe what exists now will continue indefinitely. And because of this assumption, the value of the present moment is muted. Real appreciation emerges only when you confront the truth that everything can change, that nothing is guaranteed, and that every day you are alive is temporary. This perspective transforms ordinary existence into something precious. When you vividly imagine what life could be like, without the people, abilities, or circumstances you currently have, your perception shifts immediately. The mind reacts not just with thought, but with emotion. You begin to feel the weight of absence, loss, and limitation. These imagined realities trigger the nervous system in a way that abstract reasoning cannot. Your heart, breath, and posture respond to the contrast between what is and what could be gone. This physical, emotional recognition lays the foundation for deep gratitude, because you are no longer taking the present for granted. This method works because the human brain is wired to respond to scarcity more intensely than abundance. When something is perceived as permanent, it loses salience. When it is perceived as fragile or temporary, its importance skyrockets. By intentionally confronting the impermanence of life and its elements, you magnify the value of what remains. A simple walk, a conversation, or a moment of clarity gains weight when compared to the reality of what could be lost or changed tomorrow. Gratitude emerges organically from this contrast, rather than from forced reflection or rote repetition. Awareness of impermanence also changes how you interact with challenges. When you understand that circumstances are temporary, obstacles lose their absolute power over you. You begin to see difficulties as transient rather than permanent, and this recognition brings perspective. The same event that once felt catastrophic now appears manageable when contextualized within the larger flow of life, where change is constant and nothing is static. Gratitude for the present grows because you see it as a fleeting opportunity rather than an entitlement. This perspective encourages presence. Most people live in past regrets or future anxieties, missing the reality of the current moment. By acknowledging impermanence, you are forced to anchor your attention in the now. You notice details you would have otherwise overlooked: the sound of someone's voice, the texture of sunlight through a window, the rhythm of your own breathing. These simple realities, normally invisible, become sources of profound appreciation because you recognize that each is temporary and cannot be reclaimed once lost. Impermanence also reduces attachment to trivial grievances. When the fragility of life is recognized, minor frustrations, inconveniences, and petty irritations shrink in significance. Time spent complaining or resisting what is happening now seems wasted. You prioritize what matters: health, relationships, meaningful work, and moments of clarity, because you understand their transient nature. Gratitude becomes a natural byproduct of this clarity, emerging not from effort, but from an honest assessment of reality. By internalizing the temporary nature of all things, you cultivate resilience as well. Challenges, setbacks, and discomforts are easier to tolerate when framed as passing events. Emotional energy is preserved for what truly matters, rather than being wasted on permanence illusions. The awareness of impermanence fosters acceptance, patience, and the capacity to navigate life's unpredictability with calmness and perspective. Finally, linking gratitude to impermanence deepens appreciation for simple existence. Every day survived, every breath taken, every opportunity to act or experience becomes meaningful because it could end at any moment. Recognizing that nothing lasts forever turns ordinary life into a source of awe, reinforcing a grounded, authentic sense of thankfulness that permeates thought, behavior, and emotion in a way that abstract reflection alone can never achieve. Gratitude becomes transformative when it is anchored in perspective rather than circumstance. Most people tie appreciation to positive outcomes, achievements, or favorable conditions, which creates a fragile dependency. If things are not going well, gratitude disappears. True appreciation, however, is independent of external circumstances. It arises from the ability to see the same situation from multiple angles, to recognize that even amidst struggle, there is value, opportunity, and meaning. Perspective acts as a lens that magnifies what is often invisible, allowing gratitude to emerge naturally. The brain interprets experience relative to context. When life feels difficult, it is easy to focus solely on what is lacking, generating frustration, despair, or anxiety. Without contrast, present difficulties appear absolute and insurmountable. But when perspective shifts, those same challenges are placed in relation to larger truths, past survival, temporary nature of hardships, or alternative scenarios that could have been worse. By consciously framing experience against a broader backdrop, you create space for relief, appreciation, and understanding. This is where gratitude thrives, not as a forced thought, but as a natural, emotional response to contrast. Perspective also helps detach emotion from circumstance. Most people confuse intensity with truth, assuming that strong feelings about difficulty reflect reality. In reality, emotional responses are often amplified by narrow focus. By stepping back and widening perspective, you see that challenges are transient and context dependent. The intensity of a current problem diminishes when framed against the totality of life, past experiences, or hypothetical worse outcomes. Relief emerges, and relief transforms into gratitude because the contrast highlights what is preserved rather than lost. This approach is powerful because it removes reliance on external validation. Instead of waiting for success, recognition, or favorable events to feel thankful, you generate gratitude internally by altering your interpretation of reality. Perspective becomes a tool to navigate uncertainty. You learn to appreciate stability, health, time, and relationships, not because they are exceptional today, but because you recognize the fragility of these constants and your ability to maintain them in the face of adversity. Perspective also shapes decision-making and action. When gratitude is linked to circumstance alone, action can be delayed, dependent on conditions aligning perfectly. When gratitude arises from perspective, action becomes grounded in reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. You engage with problems, opportunities, and relationships from a place of acknowledgement rather than avoidance. Seeing the bigger picture reduces emotional reactivity and encourages deliberate, thoughtful behavior. Another effect of anchoring gratitude in perspective is resilience. Life constantly presents uncertainty, setbacks, and unexpected difficulties. By repeatedly practicing the mental shift that reframes events within broader contexts, you train the mind and nervous system to tolerate discomfort without being overwhelmed. You recognize that even when things feel challenging, the totality of experience shows continuity, growth, and survival. Gratitude is strengthened because it emerges from awareness of enduring patterns rather than momentary conditions. Perspective also encourages presence. When you understand context, you notice details that might otherwise be overlooked. The small, ordinary aspects of life, the sound of a loved one's voice, the texture of sunlight, the ability to breathe and move become meaningful. Perspective magnifies the ordinary into the extraordinary because you are no longer blind to its relative significance. Appreciation is grounded in recognition rather than idealization. Finally, gratitude derived from perspective is sustainable. External conditions fluctuate constantly, but the ability to interpret life through contrast and awareness remains under your control. By consistently framing experience within context, you cultivate an enduring sense of thankfulness, one that persists even during adversity, discomfort, or uncertainty. This approach transforms gratitude from a fleeting emotion into a practical, reliable framework for how you perceive, respond to, and engage with the world. Gratitude is not a feeling that waits for perfect circumstances. It is a skill you build by seeing clearly, imagining contrasts, and recognizing the evidence of your own endurance. Every day you wake up, breathe, move, think, and act as proof that you are capable of handling life's challenges. When you anchor your appreciation in perspective, impermanence, and the reality of survival, it becomes a force that shapes how you show up, how you act, and how you value every moment. Life itself is the ultimate teacher, and the simple act of continuing is your most undeniable reason to be grateful.